I'm joined by my colleague Sarah, and we are really excited to talk to you today about the Academic Library Impact Research Grants. Just before we get kicked off, I wanted to sort of reiterate what Sarah has just mentioned. We are not necessarily planning on spending a lot of time in formal presentation. We wanted to use as much of this hour as we possibly can to address any questions that you might have about the research grants, the application process, or any other questions that you have about this really exciting project. So I really encourage you to start using that chat box straight away. Sarah and I will give a little bit of context around the project, but we don't really plan to spend too much more than 5 or 10 minutes giving that context, and we really want to spend the rest of the time addressing any questions that you have. So I strongly encourage you to start to use that chat box to submit your questions, and Sarah and I will start to address them in turn when we complete the formal part of our presentation. So let's get started then. As I said, my name is Alan Carberry. I am the Associate Director of the Library in Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont. But more applicably, I am the current chair of ACRL's Value of Academic Libraries Committee, which is the goal area committee that is overseeing this really awesome initiative. And also on the call today is my colleague Sarah, and I will let Sarah introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Geck. I work at ACRL. I'm here for a couple of years as a Mellon ACRL Public Fellow, and I work quite closely with the VAL committee on a few of their initiatives. This is one of them. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. We're really grateful. The committee, the Value of Academic Libraries Committee, is so grateful to have Sarah's support in bringing this project and a couple of other projects to pass as well. So really excited to have Sarah on board helping us with this. So yeah, we've opened the call for proposals for research grants around the Academic Library Impact Report. I am imagining there are 57 folks on the call today. I'm imagining that many of you might have already seen that call, but just sort of by way of formality, the specifics around the call for research grants for this project is available at the URL that's on your screen now, and we're working towards an April 1st deadline, so we're hoping to see 56, 57 applications in for those research grants on April 1st. Sarah is going to spend a little bit more time telling you about some of the logistics of that application, and I'm going to just spend a moment or two giving a little bit of context about how we got to this really awesome project. So I mentioned that this project is coming from the Value of Academic Libraries Committee. The VAL Committee is a goal area committee for the association, meaning that we are one of the 4 committees that has specific objectives that help ACRL achieve its plan for excellence. And the overall goal of the Value of Academic Libraries Committee is to demonstrate alignment with and impact on institutional outcomes as we demonstrate the impact of academic libraries. And we have a number of yearly objectives or sort of multi-year objectives. And for me, the very first objective that we have currently to cultivate research opportunities that communicate the impact of academic and research libraries in the higher education environment. The funding to receive research grants speaks directly to that objective. So there are so many opportunities in our libraries to do some research based on the impact or the value of academic libraries. And VAL and ACRL wants to help support those projects. And so that is exactly why this project is here, why this funding opportunity is here, and I'm super grateful to the Board of Directors of the Association of College and Research Libraries for releasing this funding for us this year. It's a really awesome opportunity. The research grants themselves are specifically tied to the Academic Library Impact Report, Improving Practice in Essential Areas to Research. So this is a research agenda that was created by OCLC in partnership with ACRL, and this report was published just this fall that outlines what are those big areas that need research or need further development in the area of academic library impact. If you haven't taken a look at this report, I strongly encourage you to do so. It's available freely online at acrl.org/value, or you can purchase a print copy from the ALA store. The research grants are intended to feed directly from this research agenda, and so this research agenda has a number of sort of research priority areas, as well as some specific research questions that you might want to consider, as well as some methodologies for those research questions as well. And so these research grants are intended to sort of kickstart the work from this report. So as I mentioned, there are a number of priority areas identified within this research agenda report, and I wanted to just really quickly flash them up here. Those research agenda priority areas are around communication of student success, mission, strategy and alignment, learning analytics, student success, teaching and learning, and collaboration. So there are sort of 6 big buckets of priority areas that the research agenda has identified. And again, as I mentioned, within these priority areas, there are research questions that you might want to consider. So a really awesome tool to sort of help you pull together and build up your application for the research grants. So I wanted to pass it over to Sarah. I'm going to pass her the ball, and she'll talk really briefly about the sort of key details of the application process, and then we'll move into your questions. So I'm passing over to Sarah right now.
Okay, thanks, Alan. So we've already seen some really great questions come up in the chat box, so we'll be sure to get to those. Hopefully you're here because you've looked at the call for proposals already, so a lot of this might be old news, but I just wanted to reiterate a couple of details, and then we'll address the questions more specifically. So in terms of logistics, we have set a deadline of April 1st. So you still have almost a month to work on your applications. The grants are for up to $3,000 each. Up to does matter. If you don't need $3,000, you don't have to apply for that much. And we'll be giving out several grants. We have about $20,000 in total that we'll be awarding. So the due date is April 1st. If you are, the success of your application would be, you'd be notified by the end of May, and we'd aim to disperse the funds in June then. And this is really for research that it should be feasible for you to complete within about a 12-month period, and then disseminate that research in the following year afterwards. So this could carry on for up to 2 years, but we would want the project that you're actually proposing for it to be possible to do that research and to have results within about 12 months. Some of the details of the application. So what you'll be submitting is just one full PDF with these components. So there's a cover sheet online that's just one page. So whoever is submitting the application, your CV or resume, if you have collaborators, we just need their names. So it'll be your CV, a brief abstract of your project, a budget outline, which is a 2-page worksheet that's also available online. And then the main part is a project proposal, which we've set a limit of about 1,000 words. So I'm going to talk about that a little more specifically because it looks like that's what most of the questions are about. So the proposal is, I think, pretty standard in format in terms of what you see in grant applications. But we ask that you clearly state your research objectives and questions. And these might align with some of the questions that are suggested in the report, or certainly with those 6 areas that Alan mentioned that are in the Academic Library Impact Report. We did get one question in, I noticed, about a line in the call for proposals that says critical perspectives will also be considered. And what we had in mind there is if you look at this report and you see, okay, there are these 6 areas, but maybe it doesn't address something else that you think ties into those, we're okay with that as long as you're making a good argument for why that matters. And obviously, it still has to relate to the primary subject area, which is around the impact of academic libraries and their contributions to student learning and success. But if there's something that you think is missing in the report, or you think could be strengthened in a different way, you can articulate that, and that's fine too. So it doesn't have to be like a verbatim question from the report. Methodology, so this is how you're going to go about answering the research questions, and why that matters, or why that's appropriate for the topic you're looking at. So if it's quantitative or qualitative, like how is that going to help you answer the question? What you're going to do, so it kind of relates to methodology again, like over the stages, over those 12 months, what are your steps to complete this research? Outcomes and dissemination plans, these don't have to be set in stone, but we do, part of what we want to come out of this is new research, and for that research to be disseminated. So just to have thought about what you're going to do with it. We are making dissemination a requirement, but we're also providing you with some options in terms of what that could look like. And those are all outlined in the call for proposals. And then finally, why this research is significant. And this is really where you should connect both to the report again, and also to, as Alan mentioned, the value of academic libraries, goals and objectives, as well as the broader sort of research landscape around academic libraries. That why does this research matter? Okay, finally, briefly, the evaluation criteria. These are all kind of interrelated, but 4 primary things we'll be looking at. The need for support for this research, the need for the research itself, so again, originality and how it's going to contribute to furthering the field. The design, so is your proposal really clear? Do we know where you're going with this? And then alignment with objectives, so again, relating to both the report and to the value of academic libraries initiative. I think there was a question about the need for support. So this is, again, let me look at the exact wording of the question, but okay, the question asks, would the award only be made if the research project could not go on without the grant funding? No, not necessarily. We do, if you look at the budget worksheet, it does ask whether you have other support. So that is a factor that we might consider. And, you know, we're not just giving out money for no reason. It's not just an award, it isn't a grant. So you have to show that the money is going to be used for your specific research activities, but as long as you make a good case for that, there's no reason your application couldn't be successful. Alan, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just really to reiterate what you had mentioned, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. I know that there was also another question about some collaborative projects that might need the sort of specific support of particular folks. I would say that I would encourage that application to still come through, but you may want to be mindful or specifically address that in the application. The review committee might wonder, what if you don't have that support? So what's the contingency plan, I guess, is really what would come to my mind if you don't necessarily have that faculty support in place.
Okay, we had a couple other questions already, so maybe we just want to address those. I think one of the early ones was whether this can be used for PhD research. The short answer is yes, but you still need to be proposing a project, so maybe an aspect of that research that can be done and that you can produce an output from within the timeline that we've identified. So if you're doing this research as part of a larger project, whether it's a PhD or even like an institutional project, you need to just be clear on what this project specifically, what you will be doing as part of this grant in these 12 months and how those results will be disseminated.
Right, and just an addendum to that, the application process is pretty clear that the grants, the actual funding can't be used to pay for tuition or anything related to sort of fees related to your PhD program, but they absolutely could form part of a research as part of your PhD program. I just wanted to also quickly pick up on James's question as well around the critical perspectives that was brought up. So can you clarify what you mean by critical perspectives will also be considered? For me, that also means, you know, I think the application process is pretty clear that we'll consider both quantitative and qualitative research projects, but there is also a line there about critical perspectives. So one of the research priorities that comes up in the research agenda is learning analytics. I think as higher education and libraries are really just beginning to understand what that means, and I think a critical perspective on the role of academic libraries or the impact of academic libraries around learning analytics, for example, would absolutely be a research project that would be considered. So for me, that's what I hear when I hear critical perspectives. I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Alan, can you address that eligibility question from Kimberly?
From Kimberly, let me just see if I can get
Are sessional lecturers with an MLS and an ACRL member institution eligible?
Oh yeah, so thanks for that question, Kimberly. So the real, the caveat to this is the ACRL membership stipulation has to be at the personal level, and so if the sessional lecturer with an MLS also holds an ACRL personal membership, then they would be. I think we were thinking that ACRL institution memberships would not be eligible. I think that is in line with what we've been saying, right, Sarah?
Yeah, so the membership requirement is for individual members.
Right, right. And the reason for that is because this is intended to be, the research agenda itself is intended to be a tool for practitioners, and the stipulation around personal membership is so that we are supporting and giving these opportunities to practitioners within the field. I hope that helps answer that. There is a question there about where can I find examples of rewarded projects. Unfortunately, there aren't any available. This is the very first time that we're offering this this research grant opportunity, and so those rewarded projects from the past, they don't exist yet. This is our first go round, and so my best advice, I think, is to really make sure that you can tie your proposal to the research agenda report. I think that's probably my best advice. Sarah, would you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, that's what was the impetus for this program. So yeah, definitely make sure you have read the report and make sure that is apparent from your application.
Right.
I wanted to go back to an earlier question. I think we kind of skipped over from Sue. Or no, sorry, where was it? Regina, can we still be awarded the grant even if we're unsure if our project would happen? If you were awarded the grant and it turns out, you know, something doesn't come through, after we make the awards, we'd be asking that any recipients sign a memorandum of agreement saying that you will in fact be fulfilling the obligations. So you'll be doing this research and the reports and disseminating your results. So if you know at that point that you can't do those things, you would have to turn down the grant at that point. You can still make the application, obviously hoping everything comes together, and just whenever, if at some point you find out that it's not going to work out, let us know. And you know, if we have another applicant we might be able to give the award to, obviously the sooner you could let us know, the better.
Right. Andy has a really interesting question. Does it specifically have to relate to student success? Could the research project, oh gosh, it's after jumping at me. Could the research project relate to faculty research and academic library impact? That's a really great question. I will say that the research agenda itself had a very specific focus around student success. And so I think for me, it means that the research grants themselves have to relate in some way to student success. And I think yes is probably the shorter answer to that. Does it mean that it's exclusively student success? Possibly not. I think that is an interesting thing that's open to interpretation. But I would imagine that it would need to have a sort of grounding in some form of student success, in as varied as that is.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just add to that you could certainly work with faculty on the project if it's something around like a class that you help facilitate that they teach. That would be something really interesting to do, but not just specific to faculty.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Deborah had a question I'm not sure we've addressed yet. My institution will not provide matching funds for grants. Are matching funds expected? Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Sure. You do not have to have matching funds. We are just asking that if your institution is supporting this research in some way, that you let us know what they are supporting and what we would be supporting. So just make that clear. This could certainly support a project that you're doing, independently, that you need funding for because you have no source of funding.
Right. Will this research grant award be available next year? That's from Elaine. It is our hope. It depends on whether the board of directors feels they're in a position to continue to fund this really exciting opportunity, but the Value of Academic Libraries Committee absolutely intends to run a second version of this in the future.
Yeah. It's in the budget, so hopefully, yes, we hope to award more grants again. Sam asked, can you use the grant money for food, for example, for focus groups? If you look at the budget worksheet, there is actually a category for incentives. So if you need to incentivize students to come along to a focus group, I would think you could certainly budget for that. Obviously not all of $3,000, but something that you would need. And related, Michelle asked about the funding for the project. In total, we have $20,000 to disperse, but the grants are for up to $3,000 each. So just to clarify.
Right, right. So Amelia has a question. We are planning to do a summer research project. We will pay an hourly wage to a student, and could we also use the grant to pay stipends to the main researcher, the librarian, and the faculty member to compensate for the summer work? We are on 9-month contracts, so we tend to use summer stipends. Sarah, anything that you want to address with that?
I think the answer is yes. I would need to double check. Certainly yes to the student assistance. I'm not sure how it would work to pay faculty time. We certainly wouldn't pay faculty time on top of a regular salary, but like if you said it's a 9-month contract and we're paying for time outside of that, that might be an option. If you could send me an email, please, I can double check just to make sure. Yeah,
thanks, Sarah. So Sarah's email is right down at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Chelsea, I'm in the process of writing my dissertation proposal, and my research questions are still being developed. Is it okay if the research questions I submit on the application change, so long as the essence is still in line with the proposed study? I think that is probably a regular and normal part of doing research, and so I would say largely yes, as long as it is that it hasn't changed pretty dramatically, and that it still focuses on the area of student success and indeed from the research agenda report. And again, Sarah, anything that you might add to that?
No, just as we said earlier, if this is part of a larger project, just also be really clear that, you know, maybe your dissertation is going to have 3 or 4 research questions, but this project is just going to focus on one aspect. That we're not funding a whole dissertation, because that wouldn't be feasible to do in the timeline of this study anyway. Have we missed anyone up to this point?
I'm just doing a scroll through and trying to make sure. I think we've got most of them. That I know that 1 or 2 have just come in right now, but I think we've got the earlier ones. If you submitted a question earlier and we haven't addressed it yet, if you would be so kind to resubmit it, that would be great. So Juliana, my institution is starting to implement an OER initiative. Can we apply for this grant for research from the perspective of enhancing teaching, learning through open education resources? I think that's a really interesting research proposal, and I think if you can tie that back to the research agenda, maybe around the area of communication or maybe around the area of teaching and learning, I think that once you can make the case as to how that slots into the priority areas of the research agenda, I think that is an interesting project to think about.
Yeah, okay. Michael's question, funds will be dispersed to recipient institutions. Does this mean that grant recipients must remain with their employer for the duration of the grant? And the disbursements to research assistants must come from the employer and not from the PI. You'll basically, if you're awarded a grant, you would get one lump sum at the beginning, and like I said, you'll be signing an agreement saying that you are going to carry out this research and all the reporting requirements and obligations. Whether you have to stay at the same institution, I don't know. I mean, you have to be able to carry out the research. I guess that's the main thing. If you can do the same research even if you're moving, then I don't see a problem with that. As for disbursements to research assistants, I think that is dependent on your institution, how they normally would deal with that process. I don't want to give a definitive answer on that because that's really up to how individual institutions work. So like I said, there'll be one lump sum, and whether they give it to you to disperse or whether HR handles it might be down to what they normally do with grants in those sorts of situations.
Right. Yeah, that resonates really well with me as well, Sarah. Thanks. So Igna, is the timeline a part of the 1,000 words? I love how librarians we're so concerned with our word count. I would say no, but I'm going to defer to Sarah.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the proposal. So, well, there's 2 components. I mean, in the budget worksheet, you're asked to put it into it's broken down by a few months. And so you put what you're spending in one of those blocks. So that's one aspect of the timeline, and that obviously goes on the budget worksheet, and there's a little space for a couple of sentences of description there. And then the proposal is meant to be a more general kind of overview of what activities you're doing in what order, and obviously that should correlate with what you have in your budget worksheet. The 2 should match up. We shouldn't be confused as to why something is in your budget at the beginning, but you don't actually talk about it in your proposal. I hope that answers this question.
Kimberly has a question that I'm not sure I know how to address that right away. Note that most institutions take a portion of the grant to pay for overhead. Is there some way this can be addressed? Sarah, anything that you want to chat about there?
I don't think that's something we can be responsible for in any way. I mean, that's just what they do.
Right.
No, I mean, so we're not going to increase the funding or anything. I mean, you can put it in the budget, like if you know what that's going to be, then obviously you're working with a slightly smaller amount, so it might account for that, but we can't prevent them from taking that out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Jane, since I'm not able to hear any sound, and you won't be able to hear me read this, will this be recorded and available later? Yes, it will, and I will also respond in the chat box that says the same thing.
I got it, Ellen.
Oh, thanks. Any other questions that you have about the process, the application, anything that you would like to run by Sarah or myself? So I know that we've had sort of offline, and not during this call, but we've had some questions in the past about the budget sort of spreadsheet or the breakdown of the budget. There are some categories there. Do I have to, if I'm completing an application, do I have to fill out every single one of those suggested lines for the budget? What might be the answer to that?
Yeah, so I didn't have it in the slides, but if you download the budget worksheet, as I assume many of you have done already, it's basically a table that you fill in, and so there are different categories around personnel, professional development, travel, as we said, incentives, anything like that. If you don't need one of those, then just don't put in anything. That's fine. You don't have to use all of the categories. As I said as well, they're broken down by kind of the periods of the grant into about like 3.5 month chunks, I think, so July to October, October to February, February to June, so that's the 12-month period, so 4 months, I guess, that the research would be done during. So try and, obviously approximate when you'd be spending what aspect of it. But just your best guess, and then obviously the total has to add up to no more than $3,000. Okay.
So I see Deborah has a question. We've moved to a library and learning commons model, and our library services and student learning resources are in one location. Our anatomical models are part of our collection. Sorry, I made a mess of that word. Could we use the grant to purchase these materials as part of the student success focus of the proposal? That's, I guess, tricky enough to answer without more context. I think I would say, again, not having the full context, possibly if you were planning on doing research that involved the use of these models, in other words, if they were an instrument or a part of your data collection or your research, then maybe. Otherwise, I don't know. I think when you submit your application, you might want to spend a portion of your application really explaining to the review committee how that forms part of your research project. Does that sort of correspond to your thinking, Sarah? I don't want to be giving conflicting information.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. This isn't for collections development, so unless it's something that's really a research tool, I'd be inclined to say no, but if you can say that this is really important to what I'm doing specifically, then like Alan said, I think that would be a case to be made.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, I guess the advice from both of us is the review committee, I'm imagining, would want to know why exactly that forms an important part of the research project that you're doing.
Yeah, and the same with any other purchases, hardware, software. You have to justify the cost, which you can do, obviously, both on the budget worksheet and in the proposal.
Absolutely, yeah. So James had a question, just curious how many have submitted so far. I think we're going to actually not, well, first of all, I don't actually know that. Sarah is managing this project. I think it's probably best that we don't necessarily answer that right now. The application process is open until April 1st, and so I'm imagining that we will, I think whatever number we give you now is maybe not necessarily going to be too informative. So I'm going to decline to answer your question in the most respectful way, if that feels good for you. And if that feels good for you, Sarah, as well.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, but since we have 56 people on the call, I'm hoping we have
Yeah.
lots of applications.
Yep, that sounds great. Chelsea, could the grant be used for transcription services? I would say that that might be an appropriate use of research funds. Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed. It's even in the worksheet. So as an example, definitely.
Yep. There's another question about how many have already been submitted. Any other questions that we can address for you? Sarah, were there any other questions that you've received, again, offline, that might be worth just elaborating on here today?
We did get a couple others about the word count. So just the 1,000 words for the proposal, try and keep it to that, because we'd rather, good, solid, concise proposals. It does not include references. If you are having a couple references in the proposal, you can not count those. But it's much better to get I think, a strong proposal that is kept to a word count than one with lots of fluff. Always the same for student essays as well.
Right. Devin, this is a great initiative. Thank you for pushing it forward. Yeah, I am particularly excited that we're able to offer this to the community. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, if anyone has more questions as well, if you are too shy to ask online, both our email addresses are there. If you want to give us a shout, we can get back to you. There are a few FAQs online, so I might add some of the questions that have come up today. And as I get in emails as well, we can add to that list to make sure everyone has a solid understanding of the call for proposals.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Any other questions that you want to send through that we address right now?
Looks like we're rapidly losing attendees.
Sounds like we've
maybe call it a wrap.
That sounds good to me. Well, thank you everybody for your time today. I hope that this was a useful opportunity for you to ask Sarah and I some questions. And as Sarah mentioned, please know that you can reach out to either Sarah or myself with any additional questions that you have between now and the April 1st deadline. And I know that the review committee that will be looking at these is excited and looking forward to reading your applications. And yeah, thanks so much for joining us today. Sarah, any last words that you want to close out with?
No, thank you all for coming, and hope to be seeing your applications coming in. The full details, full call for proposals are on the ACRL website, so have a look there and get in touch if you have any more questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.